Well, g'day everybody. It's Benjamin Morgan, the Chief Executive of Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association here in Australia. And thank you very much for joining us for AOPA Live this Tuesday, the 7th of March. That's right, we're into March 2023. And before the blink of an eye, you watch, we'll be on our way out and heading into April. So there's a lot to get done over this next 30 days. And I know that our team are very, very busy right now, and they've been all over the place. In fact, trying to advance the cause, not only of general aviation, but putting out the good word on AOPA Australia. And to speak to that, today, our Vice President, Mark De Stoop, was down in Canberra working as part of the GAN, the General Aviation Advisory Network, which reports to the Minister for Transport on general aviation industry matters. And he was there today meeting with the Director of Aviation Safety, the PMO, the head doctor at CASA AVMED, along with other industry representatives to learn more about what is happening to key reform packages, which unfortunately over the last few years appear to have stalled somewhat. And he has received some very positive news today from the Director of Aviation Safety that Part 67 medical reform is in fact going to be on track for 2023. Now that echoes a statement that was made to a recent Senate Rural Regional Affairs Transport Committee inquiry hearing, in which she made a very clear statement that CASA would deliver private pilot medical reforms in this calendar year, that is 2023. And this is something that we have been working for as an organisation, as an association, as your representative across the aviation industry, because we firmly believe that private pilot medical reform is going to be a cornerstone in helping bring pilots back to the general aviation community. Now, I was having a chat with an industry advocate earlier in the week, and he asked me the question, or sorry, I should say earlier last week, and he asked me a question, Ben, when you say general aviation, what does general aviation mean? And I guess we work on a more old school fundamental understanding of general aviation, and that is it includes everybody outside of the regional airlines. So if you're a sport and recreational pilot, aircraft owner, if you're a flight school operating in that space, if you're a general aviation flight school, a Part 141, 142 school, if you're providing a school to teach people aerobatics or anything bespoke, you're part of that group. General aviation, sport experimental aircraft maintenance centres, charter businesses, helicopter operators, you name it. That's what general aviation is. It's called general aviation because it encompasses that very wide range of general aviation businesses that are not classified as a regional air transport service or a domestic air transport service. So when we're out there advocating, that's who we're advocating for, a very wide cross-section of participants across the aviation industry. And just to remind everybody, what are the top 3 advocacy items that we are in fact working towards in all of our advocacy that we undertake? And the very simple 3-step program that we're seeking to have introduced into Australia, and it starts with Part 67 medical certification reform. We would love to see a pilot medical certification introduced into Australia that allows pilots to self-declare or self-certify their fitness to fly. If you hold a private driver's license and it's unrestricted, why can't you fly an aeroplane? And there are so many of us across the aviation industry that understand that this principle and fundamental is in fact a very safe way or a safe method to certify pilots for flying operations. And it's been introduced in the United States via Basic Med, and of course it's been introduced in the UK via the Pilot Medical Declaration, and both have been instrumental at helping revive general aviation and have gone on to create significant growth. So pilot medical reform is at the top of the list. We have to get this done. This has been an outstanding advocacy item that for almost 6 to 7 years now has been on the back burner. We have to bring it forward, and I am hoping that the Director of Aviation Safety and the PMO, Dr. Kate Manderson, can move and accelerate this year. We need this more than ever, especially coming out of COVID and the damage that that's done to flying across the country. Second in line to pilot medical reform is, in fact, instructor reform. We have to advance the cause of flight instructors here in Australia, and we need to look to countries like the United States, where they've been able to harness the power of flight instruction and drive it out into the community by encouraging people to take up their sport pilot license in the US, get involved via a recreational license, get involved via a private license, and then onward to improve that private license with IFR and all the other facilities that help improve and increase the level of safety of people throughout this great industry. And so we need those reforms here in Australia. And unfortunately, the Part 141 and the Part 142 framework have not been the answer to general aviation that the Civil Aviation Safety Authority had hoped for. And when they were introduced, we were promised by the regulator that this new framework would usher in growth and expansion in the sector, and it just simply hasn't translated. And so given that the needle is clearly indicating that it's not improving aviation, we have to go back to the drawing board. We have to look at other options. We have to be a little bit more pragmatic in the way in which we're approaching these challenges, because after all, we want to get people flying. We want to get people into those aeroplanes. We want to get them licensed and start moving them along their journey. And I've spoken about this time and time again. Every time we bring a pilot into the industry, every time somebody new starts, we are injecting an extra component into the industry to drive activity for aircraft hire. We're driving activity for fuels. We're driving activities for maintenance. We're driving activities for additional training. We're creating and stimulating the general aviation economy. And so if we want to talk about general aviation industry sustainability, we have to have a conversation about flight training. We have to have a conversation about pilot medicals. These are all essential reforms. Now, the third thing on the AOPA Australia list is our aircraft maintenance and engineering reforms that are desperately needed in Australia. And this has been an incredibly controversial subject and has brought about a huge degree of response from various sides of the industry. However, AOPA Australia remains absolutely adamant that the Part 43 reforms, if they are adopted and they are mirrored from the United States, will bring about a vast amount of positive activity into the industry, and it will help enormously. And let's just look at some of the basics. Today, if you decide that you want to operate in the sport and experimental sector of our industry, and you don't have the time to build an RV, but you've made a conscious choice to be part of that experimental community, if you buy an RV aircraft, you're not able to work on that airplane yourself. You're not able to participate as part of that sport and experimental community, and you're going to have to go and take your aircraft to a maintenance company. What AOPA would love to see is the rules change to enable these people to become empowered so that they can work on these aircraft. It's a choice that they're making. They're making a very conscious choice to participate in this particular space. So why not bring about reforms that enable pilots, aircraft owners to function in areas of aviation? If they do a suitable course and they get themselves skills trained, why can't we do this? And I'm sure we can. It's done right across the United States. It's done safely in the United States. And whilst the detractors here in Australia may want to argue that it will have some kind of imaginary negative outcome, we only need to look to the stability of the US federal aviation regulations and their economy to understand that it works, and it works so well and so successfully. So there's just three things. There's still many more that AOPA Australia is working towards, but there's just three of our highlights that we're working to each and every day in support of all of you across the aviation industry. Now, tonight's broadcast is going to be a fantastic one. I'm going to be catching up tonight with two regular personalities that we've had a great deal to do with over the years. One is Geoff Breust, who's the former managing director of Regional Express Airlines, and since retirement has now taken up the chair as the president of the Wagga City Aero Club, and is just doing an outstanding job in not only guiding the club but helping develop general aviation from that location. And the other is Alan Middleton, who is former director of the Recreational Aviation Australia Limited, was on the board of RAOS and has since departed there and is working right across the Northern Territory in helping promote general aviation. And in fact, he has formed a small aero club up in the Northern Territory at a place called Jabiru, and I'm very proud to be able to say that I joined Alan in that effort, and he and I and a bunch of others have been working hard to get that aero club up off the ground and sponsor it into existence, because we believe firmly that general aviation can also be playing a great role in Indigenous communities up north in helping not only create pilots, but helping spread the great word about how wonderful the contribution of general aviation can be, whilst at the same time doing something profound for those remote communities. So we're going to be talking to Alan Middleton as well. We're also going to touch lightly with Alan. I think we're going to learn something about him tonight. He's running as a candidate in a by-election that's coming up as well in the Northern Territory. And so we wish him all the best there, and he can tell us a little bit about that. And hopefully we might have a general aviation man in the Northern Territory government in the weeks to come. So who knows? And our very special guest this evening is none other than Trent Robinson. Now, many of you would know Trent Robinson from the work that he does through his Flight Training Australia podcast. And this is a podcast that is now the #1 aviation podcast for Australia for the topic of aviation. And this podcast is all about championing flight training in Australia. And Trent is going to be joining us this evening to talk about the challenges that are facing instructors in becoming flight examiners and obtaining their flight examiner rating, and some of the issues that these people are facing in dealing with the CASA system, and giving us some insights as to what's going on behind the scenes and potentially what some of the solutions might be for CASA in trying to resolve this. Again, it's all about bringing ideas to the table, and something I've been a huge supporter of over the 7 years that I've been here with AOPA is that we have to be in a race for ideas. We've got to be bringing these ideas to the table, and we've got to be putting aside old thinking and looking at things afresh. So I think we've got a good lineup here tonight. And I think to start, let's grab Geoff and let's grab Alan and join them to the stream. Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
Hello, Ben.
We're hanging in there. Hi, Ben.
Well, thank you so much for joining. As our tag on the video tonight stated, this is all about Aero Clubs, and you two are involved in Aero Clubs in very different parts of Australia, and both have your own unique experiences. I might start with Geoff this evening, Alan, if I can, and then we're going to throw over to you. Geoff, you're no stranger to aviation. You've been involved at the highest levels, I guess you can say, of corporate airline operation. And you've also been so profound and so active at a grassroots level with general aviation. Could maybe you share with us some of your thoughts on the condition and the health of general aviation, and some of the issues that you feel need to be moved if we are to see general aviation kicking and thriving again?
Well, Ben, I think general aviation is at a point now where it has an incredible level of opportunity, and particularly in flying training and also in the training of engineers. We all know the shortages that the industry is facing at the moment, but just here in Wagga, the interest in recreational flying and private flying and flying for your own business purposes is really very, very strong. And unfortunately, the development of that has been hamstrung by the approaches that have been adopted by CASA and the regulation of it thus far. If you sit down at any of our Aero Club meetings here in Wagga, there are three issues that come up, and they're the three issues that you talk about. You spoke about it for the introduction of this podcast, but medicals is the topic that gets raised all of the time. And the impact that the really high level approach adopted by AVMED in the certification of people to go and fly a recreational type aircraft, relatively small aircraft with only a few passengers, and with pilots who fly only a few hours a year in the overall scheme of things, is just really quite ridiculous. So we need to move to the US approach of self-certification medicals as soon as possible. And that in itself will reduce so much anxiety and frustration, and indeed bring back to the industry a whole stack of pilots who have just given up in disgust and in just sheer frustration. So whilst here at Wagga we've seen an increase in the number of pilots, and we've seen an increase in the number of local privately owned aircraft, that could be even greater if that medical reform was introduced. And I'm absolutely clear in my mind that that development in itself can then lead to further multiplier effects across the industry in the maintenance area and the flying training area. The other two issues, of course, are we, as aircraft owners and as pilots, we're always thinking about where can I continue to have my aircraft serviced to a level that I really want, and also where do I go next for my BFR or for my next endorsement or wherever. And that discussion goes on at our club pretty much all the time as well. So the introduction of the reforms that AOPA and basically the industry is suggesting will assist greatly in that in fulfilling those requirements. And I also think that it will end up attracting more younger people to the industry, because let's face it, there are a lot of old farts like myself hanging around doing this sort of stuff. But there is an interest by younger people, but they just see the level of requirement to get into the industry and to go flying and to enjoy themselves as being so high and so costly that they look for other things to do. And I think that's a real shame.
Well, Geoff, one of the issues that made, I guess, social media headlines in the last couple of months was the issue pertaining to the Rockhampton Aero Club. That's an aero club that's been in existence for a very long time. And they were involved in providing general aviation flight training. And this has been an issue that I've had raised with me with a great number of aero clubs over the years. In fact, I did a lot of work down in Tasmania with one particular aero club, which, and I think we've just got Alan back. He disappeared there for a minute. We had one particular aero club that faced the same challenge that Rockhampton did, and that is they've had to withdraw from general aviation flight training, and they've had to walk away from it because of a simple question. And it really hammered home to me the other day when a representative of the club said, Ben, we were faced with a very serious question. Do we want to continue with general aviation flight training and bankrupt the club, or do we abandon this CASA system and hand the approval for our 141 back to them and say, thanks, but no thanks? And I spoke to them and said, that's got to be a bit of hyperbole, right? You're overcooking it somewhat. And he said, Ben, it wasn't. We either handed back the 141 or we faced the bankruptcy of the Aero Club, and we had no way out. And the reason they found themselves into that situation was under this 141, 142 system that's been introduced, we no longer have the ability for an Aero Club to have a guy come out and provide flight training on the weekends. It might be an instructor, perfectly qualified instructor who's capable of teaching ab initio. He's perfectly capable of teaching the full RPL, PPL syllabus. But under this CASA regulatory environment we now live, he can't do that. He has to be approved as a 141 provider. And that then requires him to have a whole bunch of overheads and requirements that then add to the cost of the service delivery. And in the case of the Aero Club, they were very open in saying, Ben, CASA were requiring us to have a head of operations. We put 3 candidates forward. They took an incredible amount of time to process those applications to such a point that each applicant took another job because of the uncertainty. And in the end, COVID on top occurred, which has had a huge and profound impact on the labour market because there's such a shortage now of participants in the industry. Key personnel such as the head of flight operations and your what would have been your former chief pilots and chief flying instructors. These people are now demanding a much higher remuneration to undertake these roles because of this supply issue in the market. And so these aero clubs are being forced out of the market because of this onerous regulatory environment. And this is not a situation that's replicated in the US. The reason we have so many successful flying clubs right across the United States is because an instructor can do exactly what he should be doing. He can go and he can teach. And if an aero club or a flying group needs a greater coverage of instructors, they just simply grab another instructor and ask them to come hang out and help teach people how to fly. So from your perspective of running an aero club, I mean, how important is the ability to teach people to fly to the health and the prosperity of the club? And, you know, how do you feel the situation is with the current regulatory framework for instructors, and does it need to change?
Oh, it certainly needs to change, and it needs to have that level of flexibility, which is appropriate for our time. You know, we now live in the 21st century. It's not rocket science teaching somebody to fly an aircraft, especially at the recreational and private general aviation level. So, you know, why all of this additional requirement just beggars belief. So, you know, it's like teaching somebody to do a special, some sort of special task. You get an instructor, you get the student involved, you go through the practical activities associated with it, and you sign them off on a competency basis. You know, there's nothing special or outlandish about that. It's very, very straightforward.
Well, Geoff, the final question I might throw to you, because we are limited on time, and also you're quite sick at the moment. You've just been through COVID, and you did agree to come on tonight and say a few words. And I don't want you to be making yourself further ill. But I guess to demonstrate what you're saying, which is that this is not rocket science, and that if you were to take a pragmatic view on the flight instructor equation, what you end up with is a very similar system to what the Recreational Aviation Australia, or RAOs, have been permitted to do, and what has underpinned the expansion and the growth of RAOs in Australia, which should be recognised as being profound. CASA effectively delivered reforms to one group, which the whole industry's been asking for, and that one group were given an ultimate race to the finish line to go ahead and quickly get recreational flight schools up and running and to develop that into a growth model. And I think it speaks for itself. Had these reforms simply been implemented as they had been in the United States, which is the sport pilot licensing framework and the recreational licensing framework, we would see Aero Clubs Australia, right across Australia, looking far more healthy than what they are today. Now, to speak to this issue, the Royal Federation of Aero Clubs, if I've got it right, and Alan will probably correct me if I have got it wrong, but the Federation of Aero Clubs have convened a meeting this past weekend at Echuca. They've brought Aero Clubs together to have a conversation about, firstly, they need to bring the Aero Club community together to start speaking as a united voice, and that's got to be recognised as a great move by the Federation. But secondly, to start considering what the future of Aero Clubs would look like if reforms could be implemented and things could be achieved by way of a realignment of the CASA stars. If you could send a message to CASA right now, Geoff, as your closing comment, what would the message be in order for the Wagga City Aero Club to have a bright and prosperous future?
Well, of course, the medical side is the big number one. It has to happen by the end of this year, as promised, and it has to be on the same basis as the system is in the US. Very simple. But in addition to that, we need to have the flexibility for our flying training, and we need to have the flexibility to maintain our aircraft in airworthy condition. And the reforms proposed through AOPA, I think, are more than reasonable, and they should be adopted.
Well, Geoff, I really do thank you for joining us this evening. I hope that you do get better. You've got an event actually coming up in Wagga. It's not too far away now, and it's going to be a fantastic education day. Could you maybe share a little bit about that before you leave?
Yes, it's set for Saturday, the 18th of March. We have these on occasion. It was something that I wanted to introduce. It's a full day of some lectures, etc., and discussions about the sorts of things that private pilots really do need to review every now and again. But we're going through fuel management, planning and fuel management processes. We have going to talk specifically about operations at Wagga, which is a non-controlled airport with a lot of activity, both RPT, training, etc. And that's becoming quite an issue in many ways. And we're looking at various means that we can introduce locally to try and mitigate some of the risks associated with that. And there's a range of other things, particularly ADSB and the options available for ADSB out and the rebate that's involved to ensure that we get as many of our members to get this sort of great technology into their aircraft so that we can improve our situational awareness and traffic, etc. I'll just say too, Ben, I haven't had COVID, but I've had the flu this last week, and it's been a shock. So
apologies, I won't label you with COVID.
But anyway, that's a bit of an aside. But look, again, can I just say to you, Ben, personally, and to AOPA, thank you for the good work that you do. This has been an ongoing and incredibly difficult task. If we can achieve the right outcome in those three main issues over the next 6-12 months or so, it will be a fantastic outcome for our industry.
Well, Geoff, just in your closing statement there, you made another really great point for Aero Clubs, and that is a healthy, prosperous, sustainable Aero Club movement plays a great role in maintaining aviation safety by creating strong and powerful mentors and peers that pilots can look to and can interact with that help keep them safe in the air and promote a culture through aviation of accountability and responsibility. And so, it just has so many things that are so positive that ticks all of the right boxes. And I certainly hope that CASA is capable of delivering these reforms, because ultimately it's going to help foster that across the industry, and that can only be a great thing. So thank you, Geoff, for joining.
My pleasure.
Okay, that was Geoff Breust, president of the Wagga City Aero Club. And Alan, he's a great guy. He's a great ally for us here in the general aviation industry, and also for the Aero Club movements, which is why I've asked you to come along today or this evening and to join us. Alan, you've got some great news. You were just recently thrust into the new role as a member of the committee for the Royal Federation of Aero Clubs here in Australia, or the Australian Federation of Royal Aero Clubs, what are they called? Another role of responsibility. I thought you'd escaped all the volunteering and the advocacy work, but it looks like you're back into the middle of it.
It happens almost by accident, but I suppose if you've got an interest and you stay involved in things, you sort of put your hand up, don't you?
I should also note, Alan, you're wearing the Sport Aircraft Association of Australia hat, the SAAA. They're great friends of AOPA Australia, been incredible partners on our journey for general aviation industry reform, and also in the great work that we've been doing together in helping run Ausfly up in Narromine and putting together events and activities for the industry. So well done for wearing that.
Sure thing. Well, I really am an advocate, like so many of us, and yourself, Ben. That is that we are all parts of the same industry, in the same industry sector for that matter. There's general aviation, recreational flying, flying as an alternative transport mean, and that we should all come together, even in our differences for the types of aircraft we use, including gliders and others, and realise that, as Geoff and you said in his parting remarks, Aero Clubs are the entity or the mechanism, if you like, on an airport and around aviation-involved people that provide that unbiased and non-commercial, that is to say, often Aero Clubs are commercial as well, having a commercial arm, but they're there for the community. They're as a club or a community environment, and they add that mentoring across the board approach. It's a friendly environment. That's what it's supposed to be, a friendly environment, a community environment on every airport. I see it as a necessary piece of infrastructure, and so does the Royal Federation. And we know that
Alan, you're correct, mate. And I think it should be noted. I mean, how many Aero Clubs have we heard of over the last, my lifetime? I grew up, when I was young, mum and dad would take us down to the Aero Club. This is, it was part of the fabric of grassroots aviation, and so many of us share that story. But Aero Clubs have been involved in raising money for charities. They've been involved in raising money for scholarships. They've been involved in youth outreach programs to do with aviation. They have been there throughout the entire journey of general aviation virtually here in Australia. And so when we see Aero Clubs closing their doors, when we see Aero Clubs being forced to retreat away from flight training because the regulatory system that, whilst they've existed for 100 years, the regulatory system around them has changed to such a point that it stops them from doing the good work that they do. We need to see this as the canary in the coal mine moment, that kind of quintessential wake-up call that we do need change, we do need reform, we've got to change the outlook for this industry. Otherwise, more of these clubs are going to go by the way.
Oh, absolutely, and CASA should be realising the importance of Aero Clubs and be realising the importance of what CASA's messages to those clubs and to the industry generally is. If CASA has a culture within it that doesn't recognise the value of having a community connection to airports, a community connection to the safety of aviation by mentoring, by passing on knowledge through a collaborative social approach where any of the commercial pilots, young and old, can come to the airport and get a myriad of views about how things could and should be done. So the community interaction and involvement, that sort of conduit to the world outside the strict and quite commercial aspect of a commercial aviation operation at any airport is tempered somewhat by the existence of a community organisation, which is an Aero Club.
Well, the Aero Clubs came together this past weekend down at Echuca, and they've come together to try and reinvigorate not only the messaging around Aero Clubs, but reinvigorate the the leadership of the Aero Clubs to become excited for the future. And I think they should be excited. I'm often quoted, people are surprised when they hear this from me, but I'm often quoted as saying that the general aviation industry's days, our best days, are ahead of us. They're not behind us. That this industry will recover. We will get to a point where we will see a renaissance of private general aviation in this country. We're just got to keep fighting, and nothing profound ever came easily. It always took a great deal of hard work. But the clubs have come together. It appears that there's a whole new leadership team behind the Royal Federation of Aero Clubs, now being led by Joseph Pirlo, who's involved with the Sydney Flying Club out of Sydney, yourself, and a number of others who are very motivated individuals. So I think the Aero Club movement's got some exciting days ahead of it.
Well, there's a recognition that, like everything, it sometimes goes in swings of a pendulum, and the Aero Club movement has been somewhat absorbed by bunkering down to its individual Aero Clubs in the regions and across the cities into survival mode. And there's been quite a commercial focus, and there's been quite a sort of rethinking of business models and the way that the Aero Clubs interact with the communities around them. Now, that lack of community interaction and that lack of community direct involvement is one of the, I believe, most important aspects behind community, a lack of community recognition about the importance of local airports. And as you know, local airports are under threat. And I think people are realising and coming back again to the idea of the Royal Federation being an important part of the peak bodies that represent general aviation in all of its forms around the country.
Well, Alan, and I'll say this publicly, that the Federation has no greater friend than it has with the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia. We have fought tremendously hard on the issues of pilot rights and I guess the top three reforms that I've been speaking about. I don't think there's been any other industry body that has fought so publicly and so fiercely on the issue of airports than AOPA has fought. And we've done that not only for pilots and aircraft owners, but we've done that to protect our Aero Club community. And so we value Aero Clubs, we value the Federation, and we're certainly looking forward to working with your new and refreshed team. We'll be reaching out and connecting with one another. We're on today already. We were discussing ways that we can start to move that forward. I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully we can get something really powerful and unique done. Now, before I let you respond to that, I do want to just push into our last point with you, and then I need to get across to Trent because he's sitting down in the green room there, eagerly awaiting to tell us all about the flight examiner rating system. But I just need to get this out there. Alan, you've taken a really bold step, and something that I've been flirting with for some time, which is you've decided to run in an electorate in the Northern Territory, and you've put your hand up for this by-election that's on, jointly because of your passion for working up in the Northern Territory with Indigenous communities. And you've done some amazing work up there and flown all over the state and connected regional groups and remote groups. I mean, it's just fantastic what you've done there, Alan. But you also have a vision for creating a territory's strategy for general aviation because of how important general aviation is for the Northern Territory and for its people. So could you tell us a little bit about what's happening with the by-election?
Not many people are going to know where Arafura is, but I'd encourage people to tap it in, the Arafura electorate. Now, what electorate? It is Northern Territory, and it is largely Arnhem Land. That is the West Arnhem component, but it includes also the Tiwi Island and a few islands to the north of Jabiru and Kakadu. Those islands are Croker and Goulburn, and it includes the Kakadu National Park. Now, so general aviation servicing the entirety of Arnhem, but let's just focus on West Arnhem. West Arnhem is a very big area. It includes communities such as Manningrida, and right next door, just over the fence and just outside Arafura is Ramangini, Elcho Island. Those communities are remote, obviously, and during the wet season, they're inaccessible. Now, many of those communities can be accessed by sea, but general aviation, and I mean aviation up to the sort of 210 range, or my aircraft type, a Piper Lance. Yes, we've got some twins, some 310s, but the bulk of the general aviation that services some 30,000 people in those communities is 182s, 206s, 210s. And young, often mostly young pilots that have started their careers in Australian aviation from often high volume college courses, and begin their general aviation and indeed aviation careers in these areas. And it is absolutely booming. In fact, it always has, because it's basically the taxi service for that entire area. Now, booming as it has been, and so important as it has been for 50 odd years, we still have an infrastructure problem there. So, for example, aviation fuel, one Bowser, aging and somewhat unreliable, provided by Viva at this point. It's the only Bowser, and Viva tries its best, no doubt, to keep it going, but it is 300 and something kilometres from Darwin. Darwin is the next fueling spot if you're looking at that little section of the world. And from there, the next fueling spot is Maningrida. Again, a long way away and very remote. And the fact that it's so remote, if that Bowser at Maningrida goes down, which of course we know can happen to any Bowser, aircraft and aircraft safety in that area is significantly compromised. So we're talking about an infrastructure, an area where infrastructure is crying out for private sector investment. And it's through government policy over the decades where people involved in government and the development of policy, in collaboration with land councils and Indigenous elders and clan leaders, have, for some reason, not pushed the point and not had the perhaps foresight or ability or set as a priority the opening up of these airports to private sector investment to get more of this necessary infrastructure. So, for example, for my Piper Lance, an aircraft very familiar to a great many of your listeners, Ben, I simply cannot make Tiwi Island from Jabiru without popping into Darwin for a fuel stop. And that's because there is no fuel at Goulburn. There is no fuel at Croker. And the only fuel is back at Jabiru. Now, a Lance with 4 people on board simply can't do a return flight like that, especially in the wet season, with a safe margin. And that is unnecessary. You know, there are 3,000-ish plus people on Tiwi Island, yet there are no fueling or maintenance services. And yet that entire region is so busy from an aviation perspective that maintenance investment and other infrastructure, services infrastructure for aviation, including hangars and terminals, would be an obvious expectation. So that's one thing that I'm hoping to influence, and I call on all of those people, residents, pilots who know that area, and of course who are registered in that area, to perhaps reflect on the need for these services and perhaps support me in putting these sorts of discussions to the Northern Territory House.
Well, Alan, it's it's no small feat to get yourself elected to either the state or the federal parliament, and I certainly do wish you all the best. As I've already said to you privately, and I'm happy to say it to you publicly, the association will do all that it can in helping get the message out. We're going to be following up this video broadcast with a written editorial, which we'll be publishing via our Facebook social media. It'll go onto our website, and we'll also send it out via the newsletter service that we provide our members. And also, I am connected with quite a number of politicians and interesting people throughout the Northern Territory, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we can see an AOPA Australia member into the Northern Territory government, and you can do some great work not only for your local community up there, but you can also do some great work for the state aviation industry and community and the federal national aviation industry. So thank you so much for putting your hand up. Public service is not easy. I can tell you, someone has to sit in front of a camera and speak on behalf of a group of people. It's not easy. And I think the old saying goes, the fastest way to lose half your friends is to have a public opinion. And I think you could lose a great deal more by using the job title of politician. But it's great to see you having a go, mate. And we really do wish you all the best. And thank you so much for joining us this evening as part of this program.
Thank you, Ben. We've got a lot of Indigenous folk right across that Arafura area that are just love the idea of being involved in aviation in some way.
And we need to make sure to get you connected to the Indigenous, the Australian Indigenous Aviation Foundation that AOPA Australia is actually a partner to. Not a lot of people realise the great work that AOPA has done in partnership with the Royal Flying Doctor Service and others in helping foster and create the Indigenous Aviation Foundation, which has set the goal to create flight training facilities and access for Indigenous communities. And again, you know, Alan, that was one of the motivating reasons you and I got involved to say, let's do something at Jabiru, let's make this happen. So thank you so much, mate, for the great work that you've been doing, the work that you're continuing to do, and also for putting your hand up for the Federation of Aero Clubs. I look forward to working with you into the future. Thanks again.
Thanks again, Ben. Cheers.
Okay, well, that was Alan Middleton. He's a character indeed. Ex-RAAF pilot as well, been on the board of RAOS, a great sport experimental aircraft participant and an absolute passionate advocate for general aviation in Australia. If you get the chance to catch up with Alan at some point in your travels around general aviation, I can promise you he's well worth the time for sitting down and having a yarn. Now, my next guest this evening, he's been patiently waiting. I have to apologise, Trent. I always talk far too long. But we are really, really fortunate to have you joining us here this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Trent Robinson. He is a flying instructor. He's a flight examiner. He's a former charter pilot, chief pilot at one point in time, or you may still be a chief pilot. You've done it all. And on top of that, add to the credentials and add to the resume that you currently run the #1 aviation podcast here in Australia.
Yeah. Look, it's I started November over a year ago, and it's something I've wanted to do for ages, and just start putting back, I guess, into aviation. And listening. My wife listened to a lot of podcasts. It wasn't something I really did, but I wanted to do videos, and I just haven't done it for so long because it just takes so much time. And so I thought, all right, hang on, this podcasting works okay. I can do that fairly quickly, knock it out, and everyone's just latched onto it. It's Australian content. It's all about flying in Australia, regulations, all sorts of stories, interviews with former students, people I know, people I don't know. It's just going really great. We've got about 2,000 sort of downloads a week at the moment. It's just reached. I'm stoked. So it's going really well, and I'm keen to just keep that going every Monday. Yeah.
Well, Trent, it's really, really awesome that you're doing that work. And on behalf of everybody, I really thank you for doing it, because we need more content being produced by the Australian aviation industry. It's actually critical to helping us promote aviation and to encourage people to take part. But most importantly, it harkens on this one thing that I am so passionate about, and that is we should do everything we can to start a conversation. Debate is actually a really good thing. If you can have a conversation and people can sit down and talk about whether they think things are running well or things are not running well, and to consider alternates, that's a great thing. And that is, in fact, what brought you and I together in our first conversation. It was you responded to some opinions and some commentary that was being put forward via the AOPA Facebook page in relation to a short piece that I did on behalf of some members who came forward saying, Ben, we're flying instructors, we're trying to obtain flight examiner ratings, we're going through the mill, it's not working, we're spending a lot of money, we're years into the process. Some of them are saying, I don't even think there's an outcome for me, I might have to just give up and walk away, God forbid. And you actually contacted, you put some responses down, and you were able to validate some of those experiences. And you and I had a very brief conversation in which you discussed that there are challenges there. There's an opportunity as well for CASA to get ahead of this and to tackle it. And I thought, what a great opportunity to bring you into the live stream and have you give us your perspective on the challenges, your perspective on what maybe is causing this, and maybe some of your ideas on how we could come up with a pragmatic solution. So with that, maybe I'll shut up and I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, well, look, I was sitting listening to the other two and thinking, oh man, there's so much. Because, I mean, I guess the history of all this goes back quite a long way, where really when flight training and flight examiners, there really was no facility in CASA for us. There was no one really running it. And so Roger Weeks was my CFI at the Royal Aero Club at Jandakot, where I'd spent a good 10 years teaching and later on became CFI and chief pilot for. He and others got the flight testing office up and running, which actually really resulted in development of the training system, national standards, and now what we see is the MOS and everything in Part 61, where we're actually laying out all the training and syllabus items so we can actually be more regulated in what we're doing. And the flight testing system sort of then took a bit of a change where we're all independent examiners. Initially, you were tied to the school. So I was tied to the Aero Club with my testing approvals. I left, went to another company. I couldn't test for 6 months because they had to wait for the approvals to be reallocated. That was just a paperwork thing. So that was always frustrating. But anyway, we're now into this point where we need to have an application process. 5 flight tests need to be conducted. So you observe 2 being done by your mentor, which we'll get to in a minute. And then after that, you need to do at least 3 where you're conducting the test with the mentor sitting in the back. And once you're up to that stage and then everything's good, you sit down with CASA and do your flight test. So in concept, it all sounds relatively simple and straightforward. But I think the way it's sort of set up looks okay, but it's based on someone who's probably in a major capital city with a decent capacity of student flow, 141 or 142, where flight tests are sort of coming out your ears. So if one doesn't happen, doesn't matter, there'll be another one around the corner. So what we sort of got now is people are getting organised. And again, you know, there's all sorts of stories out there that some of which you've heard. I've had, and my own example of trying to expand my own qualifications. We've had 5 tests all organised, and then the week just gets wiped out with rain. So all of a sudden, nothing's happening. CASA's wants this all done in 6 months, and they go, hey, where you at? I'll put COVID aside because that was obviously a completely difficult process for everybody. But just even 6 months, you'd think that would be enough time, but it's just not. There are so many stumbling blocks of flight tests not going ahead as planned, people getting sick, weather delays, students not being ready. And that's just if you've got everything at your doorstep. So mentoring is probably the first thing. You need to find a mentor, some senior examiner who CASA is going to deem acceptable to them to say, yep, we're happy with that person, that they know what they're doing, and they're going to teach you the right way and take you through the process. Before that happens, you need to go through some online e-modules. So that's sort of phase 1. Before that, recently, you did have to have your flight proficiency check done by CASA. And that was proving a huge stumbling block because there's 1 or 2 active examiners in the flight testing office that can go out and do that. I think there are 1 or 2 others.
I think, Trent, we should just stress on this point that there are 1 or 2
yeah,
1 or 2 people in the regulator
there's 2
that handle
are
this
active.
space.
Yeah, there's 2 that are active, others that run. I don't know if there's any others all coming, but yeah, there's definitely 2 that are active. But it was taking ages for them to get around, and I totally get that. And these poor guys as well, running around all over the countryside, probably away from home all the time, like it'd be really difficult. So trying to group people together and take care of that. But obviously they want to know that you're a decent instructor, you're capable and going to be a suitable examiner. So again, I can understand that. They've made changes to that. So that's going to make life a bit easier. Because again, we're trying to put more trust into industry instructor examiners that can do FPCs. And so look, if you're going to go into testing, you know, these are the things you really need to be doing and working on. And as with any instructor upgrade, this is an upgrade to be an examiner. You need to go through the motions. And I have instructors ask me, like, I want to do my grade 2 because I've got 200 hours. I go, okay, well, let's go through the process. And through that journey of discovery, you'll soon see that you're not quite up to speed or not, but that depends on the standard that's sort of been held in the area. So the mentor, where do you find a mentor? Up in Darwin, there's me. There's 1 or 2 others that might be suitable, but there's only really 2 flying schools up here. Otherwise, if you're central or anywhere out of a major town, it's going to be really, really difficult. That usually then means the flow of students is slow. And we now need a mentor, yourself, and the applicant all to coincide to be available at the same time. I know you had some people comment like they had up to 5 hours of travel. You try and book that, you get there, students are sick, not ready, it rains, you potentially for overnight accommodation, your fuel. It's a huge commitment, and that's even assuming that you can manage to get the day or days off to go and do it.
I think one of those
there's
examples, Trent, one of those examples, one instructor outlined that he had tried to facilitate that process and it went on for nearly 6 weeks. And he traveled up there and ended up staying in accommodation for 6 weeks whilst
just waiting.
All these different sequences kind of started, didn't complete, started, didn't complete. I think CASA had even organised to come up and then they had to cancel, and it just became a cluster. And so 6 weeks of expense to put himself up, be accommodated, and just basically sit there waiting without working. It's a huge undertaking.
It is, and that's no one's fault. That's just where the tests are and how it needs to work. But it's a massive impost on the individual, the examiner applicant, and what they're trying to do. So yeah, trying to find an examiner mentor that is willing to do it as well. I mean, I've done quite a few now. It's extra work, sure, but you know, if it's work, I guess I can charge. But again, I'm also cognizant of the fact that people, you know, it's all costing money. We're not all made of money. I have to do it myself, so I try, and if I'm getting paid a flight test fee from the student, I don't need to charge the applicant anything, or maybe some briefing time if we spend some time on the side, which we do. But I know some just don't want to do it and charge a huge amount. And if that's the only person that's really accessible to you, then some are paying thousands to basically get to participate in these flight tests. Some don't want to be a flight examiner in the back seat. They're just kind of like, no, stuff that. So that thins out the number of people willing to do it. And I know that's just hard enough in a major capital city, let alone if you're rural. So
from your perspective, is the mentoring system working, or does the mentoring system need to be reviewed?
I think it can work, and I think for the initial delivery, I think, you know, it's quite reasonable. You do the online learning, you do all the PDP modules and everything else, and it's good. You get taken through the whole process. You do all the mentoring, and then at the end you sit down with CASA. You do the test, and it's kind of a part assessment, part education flight test, because they obviously want you to be comfortable doing it all. But take myself, for example. I can pretty much test everything, including doing examiner proficiency checks, but I can't do commercial flight tests. And that came about because the rules changed. I was doing my instrument and commercial testing at the same time. I was doing my mentoring when it was 3 tests. The rules changed and you could only do one at a time. Now, part of my argument was, well, can I at least keep the mentoring for both going at the same time? Is because the number of commercial and instrument tests coming up was quite sporadic, and this could take me 12 months just to get 5 of each. Actually, sorry, that was 3 of each at that time. And then, you know, other things happened and the commercial didn't happen. I went and finished the instrument. So just a couple of weeks ago, I did my EPC again. And I thought, right, can we come back to the commercial testing? Because, you know, we've got a few students that in Darwin that need commercial tests. Not many. Everyone pretty much comes here either with it or does RPL, PPL training. But there's a couple. So at the moment, we have to fly in an examiner. And I spoke to the testing office, and they was pretty insistent that, well, we really want you to do at least one more mentored flight. And I thought, okay, if I've got to do that. Now, if you look at the, the flight examiner rating course profile, there's 4 main flight tests that CASA put key focus on. That's the PPL, the CPL, the instrument, and the instructor. And what that essentially means is they want you to sit down with your work booklet that you put together through the PDP process. You fill in all your questions. So each flight test element, you'll get 3 questions and 3 answers so that you've got different scenarios and things to work with. And essentially, from a commercial testing point of view, from all the testing that I do, that's the only thing that's really going to change. The conduct of the test is essentially the same as all the others. Okay, what we do, there's some different elements on there, but it's really just the questions that are changing. Now, I've proven myself time and time again that I understand scenario-based questions. I talk about it all the time in my podcast, educating the listeners so they know how to go in and answer these questions. So why are we holding, let's call myself industry, back by not letting me do commercial flight tests? If, really that could be a phone conversation and go, all right, give me some commercial questions and take me through how you're going to conduct the test. Yep, great. You know what you're doing, off you go. It's sort of a one size fits all approach. And we're not exactly talking about everyone that holds a pilot license here. It's a very small group of people trying to get examiner ratings that I think once they've been in the system for a while and proven themselves, and they're not on the hit list for not doing things properly, everyone's passed, the flight times are too short, all the little things that, they're looking for. I think there needs to be some more flexibility there to allow that. It'll free up the system. It improves the system because it means more examiners are available. It means CASA doesn't have to try and come out to me. I don't have to pay for them to come, or I have to go to them. And I think it's a win-win situation that we're all working together. I'm never pig-headed enough to think I know everything and I'm perfect, but I'm happy to do something. But does it really need to be the whole, as if I'm an initial applicant for this particular testing approval?
Well, there certainly has to be a more pragmatic way to approach some of these challenges in recognising there are going to be some applicants who have more than enough experience as a instructor in the industry, having amassed not only the time, but I guess the breadth of type of applicant that they've been teaching. So that, from my perspective, trying to understand many of the issues that have been brought forward by the individuals who've written to AOPA to say, could you please start raising these concerns? And this is my story. It seems to me that if CASA are in a situation where they've only got a couple of staff members dealing with this particular area, I think we would all accept and we would all recognise that flight examiners are a resource for this industry that we desperately need. They're a resource to support the growth and expansion of the industry. Noting as well, as Sandy Reith has indicated in the comment earlier, that there's an argument as to whether this particular regulatory structure is actually working for Australia or whether we need to look at the US system in respect of how they approach these challenges. But it is a resource at this point in time. Under our current regulations, we need flight examiners. We do need to address, is there a more pragmatic way that CASA can work with applicants to make a determination that, okay, look, yep, you as an applicant, you've got immense experience. Let's take a pragmatic approach. Let's fast track you through this process, and we might come back in, 6 months' time, or we might come back in a year's time, and we want to take another look at you then. Or it might be the applicant comes along and a decision is that this person doesn't necessarily have the level of experience where we can fast track, so we're going to require you to go through a more rigorous process. I mean, is that something you would support?
Definitely. And that's the idea of the surveillance system, that, once you get your initial testing approval, they basically say, look, at some point in the next 12 months or 6 months, I can't remember, I think it's 6 months, we're going to come and sit in the back and watch you. Again, not to, it always seems threatening when someone's watching you, but just to make sure you're doing okay. And I've always found the CASA team very supportive in that sense, and want you to succeed and be comfortable and approachable. And, sometimes things come up and I'm like, hey, look, this scenario just happened and I haven't had this one before. What do I do? Or I can obviously ask other examiners, who I use as mentors myself. So I think anything like that's great. I mean, the system's definitely been good in the sense, like before, we had many military instructors could not come into the flight examiner system because they had to be a grade 3, then a grade 2, then a grade 1, and do all that. And the recognised flight training military time wasn't being recognised. Whereas now it's a lot easier for them to come into the system. You can go straight in and be an instrument examiner if you want and focus in your area of expertise. So there's definitely been some fantastic changes being made and made it more accessible in that sense. But the mentoring process, it just can take so much time. And it's just, I just, when I did my instructor testing, I drove the hell out of it. I had to organize the examiner to come up from Perth. I had my renewals, my initial issues, whatever's going on. I was doing all the training, getting everybody absolutely ready. You're coming, you're good. Yep. Like people coming in from Derby, from Broome, some here from Darwin, to make it happen over this sort of 4-day period. Where I just got it all done in 4 days. But yeah, I had to make it work hard. And the problem with a lot of applicants is they're not in that control space where they're kind of reliant on the mentor to say, hey, I've got a test on Tuesday. Would you like to do it at whatever level they're ready for? And if the mentor's not really engaged in it, the test's going to go by. And then, they'll see a flight test is done and go, oh, what I could have done that. So it's CASA need to just look at examiners down the line, adding endorsements, maybe being a bit more practical with it. But us as mentors, we need to help the system as well. I personally am so flat off my feet. I'm not threatened at all by mentoring others, thinking they're going to take work from me. There is so much to go around.
And that by the way, has been an issue that's been raised by a number of persons who've contacted me in the last 2 weeks on the issue, and they've said to me, and you, I know you and I have discussed this, and your view was for you personally, this, you don't see it as much of an issue, but I have been approached now by a number of instructors who've said, I've actually approached persons to do the mentoring, and those persons have actually said to me, I'm not interested in doing the mentoring because I don't want competition. I don't need more people in this area. And they were steered away. And I mean, I can't, you honestly have to be able to say, you can't expect that that's not going to be a conversation in certain areas and certain people, because number one, the cost of obtaining an examiner rating, the amount of money you can claw back through providing your services, depending on your area, how many people are you going to be having access to, this all starts to come into it. And so I guess what CASA has created in doing all of this is they've created a bit of a monster for themselves, because they can't control that. CASA can't physically stop people from saying, well, I get to choose who I fly with. You can't tell me who I have to mentor. That's a choice I get to make.
Well, that's right. And I appreciate that some places may have a few, but I know, I get asked to go different places in Australia sometimes just because there's no one around. And so how many are there? And I know a lot that are sort of not tied to their flight school. They can do stuff outside, but they're pretty much, if they work for a flight school, they're really, that's their scope. They're not going to do much outside of that either because of time and availability. But I don't know, my experience is there is more than enough. There's a stack of examiners that I know that are into their late 60s, 70s, that they're going to be retiring soon. And this process is not a couple of weeks, you can be an examiner fix. Like, I really think we need more. And the feedback I'm getting, like, I really just get the main Darwin region. Sometimes I'll go to other places. I'm not even pushing east. I've been asked to go to Gove and Jabiru and other places to do tests, but just the time and the cost to get me there for one test or two tests, it's not really worth it. So everyone comes to me here. But look, I guess everyone knows what's going on in their area. And it's up to individuals. And as you say, my view is I want to put back into industry. I want to support it. I see that, there's a stack. They're going to be leaving, and who are we replacing them with? And we want good, experienced examiners, maintaining the standard, not doing as well a good job, not really being comfortable what they're doing, inexperienced instructors, and the standard gradually falling, and then we start getting into other problems.
Well, it's an essential resource for the industry. We have to have them under the current regulatory system. If we don't have a supply of flight examiners, we're in real strife. Some of the people that have come forward, Trent, have been saying to me that they've got as much as 20 and 30,000 plus in pursuing their flight examiner rating. Your thoughts on that?
Dollars, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I certainly haven't had to shell out that much. But I've been very, very fortunate. Like, the people that I've used to do it have been, friends, colleagues. So they've been happy to. I've paid a nominal fee for their services. They were getting a test fee from the applicant, so they didn't need any more. But I know some mentors have been charging the normal test fee to the applicant, and the flight exam applicant's been paying it's essentially a double fee. Again, that's up to the individuals, and I guess that's no different to going to a flight school, and they can charge what they want, and you've got to shop around. And maybe it needs to be that you organise to just you go away for an instrument rating for 4 or 5 weeks or whatever, get it done. Instructor rating, maybe the examiner rating, you've got to view the same way, and go somewhere where there's a good mentor to look after you. You're going to be able to culminate those 5 flight tests in a reasonable time frame, and get it done that way. So I don't have a problem with what needs to be achieved, but there's definitely problems with how it is. So I do what I can to help the system. I've gone through it myself. Still don't have commercial testing, so I'm still going through it myself. I would make another phone call and say, hey, what can we do here? Surely it's a stroke of a pen thing, but if it's legislation and all that needs to go through, I'm happy to do another flight test to prove myself or whatever it is. But again, an EPC's just gone by that I paid for. I could have got something more out of it. And it's like, well, why? What did we really achieve? It all went very smoothly. Okay, great. You know what you're doing. Continue. Again, not to sound egotistical, but there's a lot of us that know what we're doing and we're good. There's others that are struggle or in the old system or not in flight training. And I think that's a difference. If you're in the other sectors of aviation, not in the flight school environment, you might fall a bit behind with the changes in the MOS and the regs and stuff. So I understand CASA's attempt to capture these things, but like I said, we're not dealing with a mass group of people. We should be able to deal with individuals on a case-by-case basis.
Well, it leads me to my next question, excuse me, which is that obviously this is not a large group of people. And so maybe a sensible approach to this would be for CASA to pretty rapidly put together a bit of a round table and to get participants to the table and start, I guess, asking the questions. Where are the problems? Where are the hurdles? Where are the roadblocks? It seems to me that they need to have a bit of awareness, not only as the industry's awareness, but CASA's internal awareness and management's awareness of this particular issue. I'll be sending a communique off to Pip Spence this week, notifying that we believe that this is an issue and it'd be worthy of CASA organising a round table. So I guess the question, if a round table's organised, you're going to put your hand up to sit at the table and put forward your views.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to. That's what I'm trying to do, make change in whatever way. So yeah, I'll be happy to be involved for sure.
Okay. Well, look, thank you so much for sharing with us some of these perspectives on the flight examiner rating. Before we close up with you this evening, I'd just like to throw off the cuff, just throw a couple of questions at you and just see how you go with it. But obviously, okay, you get to see general aviation across the Northern Territory. You've also, like many of us, you've grown up within aviation and you're part of that process. What do you think needs to be changed in order to really kickstart a general aviation renaissance and to get growth going for the industry? How do we get pilots in participating, not just at an airline level, but kickstarting a private aviation resurgence?
Look, I don't think aviation is particularly hard to sell. Like when I have instructors, I say, what business are we in here on the instructor course? And they'll say, oh, flight training. Or that. So, well, no, we're not. We're in the people business. We just happen to have airplanes and all that out the back. It's not a hard thing to sell. The problem is the affordability. So, like Alan was talking about, just trying to access fuel, but then fuel gets loaded up with fuel subsidies and things. We're now experiencing landing fees, or like last week, you're talking about the rental prices going through the roof and all that. So we need to stop trying to make money out of aviation in that sense and start making it accessible to everyone. RAOS has created a whole new accessibility for people. You've got gliding, you've got parachuting, all the different things that go up in the air and fly. So I think depending on what you want to do, there's a way to get involved in some way, but definitely just trying to make it affordable and accessible to people and continuing things like Avalon, Illawarra Air Show, all these air shows that are coming up to let people know what GA is. I still find it just fascinating that you can talk to people and they just still know so little about what we do. To us, it's just so second nature, but people still just don't have a clue really how an airplane works or how it flies. So keeping that public engagement going as well and letting people know that, you can do all this. It is accessible. You don't need high level maths and physics and English and all that sort of thing. Yes, there's lots of knobs and switches there, but we just put them there to make us look really impressive. We don't actually do much with them. Creating opportunity for people to get involved in aviation, I think it's just one of the best things. If I can take someone flying, I do. Never really been able to afford it in the past, but every now and then I might have a spare flight and someone can come along and they just get that spark, and even if it's not them, they might talk to somebody else. Talk to the guy at the checkout, they've got my shirt on and go, oh, you're a pilot, and talk to them about it. They may never fly, but just talking about it makes me feel good.
Raising that awareness.
And they talk to other people, and you just never know how that conversation might filter through to their networks and end up being a learn to fly inquiry in your email the next day.
All right. Well, Trent, for those that are interested in doing so, and I thoroughly recommend this, if you'd like to get a hold of Trent's podcast, you're producing the podcast weekly?
Yeah, every Monday. So there's the website you can go to, and it's on Apple, Spotify, Google, all the main podcast servers. So I try and get out every Monday morning for when you wake up, going to the gym or whatever you're doing. And interviews, anything related to GA, Part 61 stuff, Part 91 things. They've been definitely some of the major topics because no one understands it. So I do my best to have it fully researched and accurate, so I'm not spreading more misinformation. But love to have you join me and send me an email if there's anything you want discussed. Send me a message and
okay,
I'd love to cover it.
Well, thanks you so much for joining us this evening, Trent. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here and some great insights into that mentoring on that flight examiner rating. We'll be reaching out to CASA, and I certainly hope that they do organise a roundtable and extend some invitations, as we need more people like you around the table, starting those debates, having those conversations and coming up with solutions. So thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, well, we've discussed a little bit to do with Aero Clubs this evening and touched on flight examiner ratings. I now want to scare the living crap out of you, and I want to play a video which I'm sure each and every one of you are going to find as confronting as I did when I saw this. An issue which I have raised on multiple occasions over my 6.5 years with AOPA Australia is the need to ensure that our aviation regulator, our accident investigators, and that our Department of Infrastructure are appropriately staffed with people who have a genuine understanding and knowledge of the subject and the topics of which they are there managing and controlling. And I'll say from the outset, there are many people who work within the Civil Aviation Safety Authority and the ATSB and the Department of Infrastructure that do a very good job. But there are also those that we all scratch our head at times and wonder how in God's name did these people make it to end up inside of that organisation. Now, let's put ourselves in an incredible situation. Let's ask ourselves, what would happen if a government recommended a person to run an aviation regulator and the person had absolutely no clue whatsoever about aviation? Well, this is a situation that the Americans, strangely enough, are now finding themselves in. The Biden administration has put a recommendation forward for a person to be appointed to run the FAA that quite literally has no clue of aviation at all. And I'd just like to play this video, and then afterwards I'll make a few comments.
Mr. Washington, thanks for being here today. I have some concerns with your nomination, but first of all, besides that, I just want to say thank you for your service to our country through our military. We have a lot of veterans, a lot of military installations in our state of North Carolina, and so we appreciate what you've done. Now, you've been nominated to lead an agency with authority to regulate aircraft, airspace, and airmen. The U.S. has some of the most complex airspace in the world. I mean, we've got over 200,000 registered aircraft, more than 1 million pilots in our country, and over 45,000 flights per day handled by ATC. Now, with recent issues under the Biden administration, from the flight disruptions over Christmas, the NOTAM or the Notice to Air Missions ground stop, and the recent near miss incidents in New York, Texas, and just yesterday in Boston, my colleagues and I were concerned about the many or several parts of your background and your lack of aviation experience. Now, there's many new regulations that the FAA has issued or is in process of developing. Here's one, for instance. The FAA is spending billions of dollars on its next-gen program, as you're aware, to modernize the national airspace system. A key part of this update is moving towards GPS navigation for pilots and ATC. Now, as part of this transition, the FAA recently required airplanes to be equipped with an ADS-B transponder. So, Mr. Washington, can you quickly tell me what airspace requires an ADS-B transponder? Quickly, please.
Thank you for the question, Senator. Not sure I can answer that question right now.
That's okay. We'll just keep going. So that's a pretty important part. But another question. You've said that your national security background, and again, I appreciate your military experience there, but you say that's prepared you for this role. It's okay. The FAA has classified airspace to meet the needs of airports, air traffic, and also national security. The FAA has also designated special use airspace over DoD bases critical to national security. So what are the 6 types of special use airspace that protect this national security that appear on FAA charts? Quickly, please.
Sorry, Senator, I cannot answer that question.
Okay, we'll just keep going. So thank you.
Sure.
Since World War II, the FAA has required pilots to have a valid medical certificate. I've got one. In recent years, the FAA has relaxed these standards through the introduction of the Sport Pilot Certificate and also Basic Med. It's been a great success. More than 70,000 pilots in the last 6 years have used Basic Med to maintain their flying privileges. So what are the limit? It comes with some limitations. So what are the operational limitations of a pilot flying under Basic Med?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I'm not a pilot, so.
But obviously you'd oversee the Federal Aviation Administration. So any idea what those restrictions are under Basic Med, quickly?
Well, some of the restrictions I think would be high blood pressure. Some of them would be.
It's more like how many passengers per airplane, how many pounds in different categories, and what altitude you can fly under. So, and then amount of knots. It's under 250 knots. So it's not having anything to do with blood pressure. So let's keep going here. It's aviation. I've heard you talk about aviation and safety and it being a particular concern of yours. I appreciate that. Stall spin accidents are a particular concern for general aviation safety advocates. Accidents involving an unintentional stall account for nearly 25% of fatal aviation accidents. And these happen at spins at low speed and low altitude, and they're particularly dangerous. Can you tell me what causes an aircraft to spin or to stall?
Again, Senator, I'm not a pilot, but I would lean on our career employees and our safety folks within the FAA.
Okay, let's keep going. So we mentioned just recently, Senator before me mentioned the 737 MAX issues. So there are many questions surrounding the FAA's aircraft certification process. 2 years ago, Congress passed a major reform package to address these concerns. It's now up to FAA to implement these laws by issuing regulations and monitoring compliance. Mr. Washington, what are the 3 aircraft certifications the FAA requires as part of the manufacturing process? Quickly, please. 3 aircraft certifications.
Again, what I would say to that is that one of my first priorities would be to fully implement that Certification Act and report.
You know the 3 types, Mr. Washington? The 3 types? Okay. Yeah, that's type certificate, production certificate, and airworthiness certificate. Okay. All right. Let's just keep going, see if we can get lucky here. All right. So just since January, the U.S. has narrowly averted 3 aviation disasters. On 3 separate occasions, airplanes came dangerously close to colliding on runways at New York JFK, Austin Bergstrom, and the Boston Logan Airport. The Austin incident reminded me of the Tenerife accident, which is the deadliest aviation accident in history. Both the incident at Tenerife and Austin involved 2 planes on a runway in dense fog. The FAA's ATC procedures manual has separation standards. Now, I know you run a big airport, so you should probably know this one here. It's got separation standards for planes using the same runway. So can you tell me what the minimum separation distance is for landing and departing airliners during the daytime, Mr. Washington?
I don't want to guess on that, Senator,
Okay.
but
All
it would be easy for me to find out.
Thank you. You know, the FAA is woefully behind on integrating unmanned aircraft standards, but are you familiar with the difference between Part 107 and Part 44809 when it comes to unmanned aerial standards? Unmanned like drones, are you familiar with the difference?
Yes.
Okay, you know the difference between those two, Part 44809 and Part 107? Do you know the difference there?
No, I cannot
That's okay.
spell that out for you.
Senator's time is
Yeah, thank you.
expired,
You
so-
know, the FAA can't afford to be led by someone who needs on-the-job training. And for that reason, I'm going to be opposing your nomination. But thank you for your time.
Senator Close.
Wow. That's about all you can say to that. Wow. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it again. If you don't understand aviation and you don't have a clear understanding of its impacts across general aviation, how do you know that the team around you are giving you the information that you need and are producing the outcomes that are going to help the industry? There's some great lessons to be learned by that. And with that, I'll leave the broadcast for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for AOPA Live this Tuesday. I say this at the end of every single video, and I really do mean it. If you like the work that AOPA Australia does to support general aviation here in Australia, advocating for a brighter, more successful and sustainable future, then I really do encourage you to jump on board. You can join the Aero Clubs that have actually contacted us this week and last week, rejoining the association and pledging their support. And I do extend a sincere thank you to each and every one of them that have been coming through. It's been great to see that support, but you can stand with them and you can stand with us for just $159. It's a great investment in your own future here in general aviation. And I encourage you to jump online to www.aopa.com/membership, become a member. It's the greatest $159 you'll spend in aviation. And it must give some kind of comfort knowing that there's going to be somebody there fighting for your rights as an aircraft owner, as a pilot, and as a participant of this general aviation industry. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your support. And I really do look forward to catching up with everybody next week. It's Ben Morgan from AOPA Australia.